Did you know that for Native Americans, winter nights were not a time for rest, but a real battle for survival? In the vast prairies and dense forests, the slightest mistake in behavior led to instant hypothermia. These people did not have modern sleeping bags, but they possessed knowledge that allowed them to sleep in the snow. Every prohibition and every strange rule had a clear logic behind it: to preserve heat. Watch the video to the end, and you will find out exactly what detail in the teepee's design saved entire tribes from freezing to death. What if I told you that everything you believed about sleeping in a winter forest could be deadly? The Indians of the Great Plains and forest regions had an unbreakable rule: never lie on the bare ground. Even if the soil seems dry, in winter, it acts as a giant pump that sucks heat out of the body. To survive, they built special high platforms out of fresh conifer branches. Particular attention was always paid to the order in which the branches were laid to create a resilient air layer. Spruce or pine branches served as a natural insulator that did not allow the cold from the frozen ground to pass through. On top, these platforms were covered with several layers of thick bison hides with the fur facing inward. Violating this rule meant that a person would wake up with severe chills after just an hour. The use of skins was also subject to strict rules, which took into account the direction of the animal's fur growth. The Indians understood that the air trapped in thick fur is the best insulator on the planet. They never used old and worn skins for sleeping in winter. Each family carefully monitored the condition of their sleeping quarters throughout the season. Anyone who tried to ignore these instructions from the elders quickly realized their fatal mistake. Winter in the northern latitudes did not forgive carelessness and demanded strict adherence to traditions. It was this discipline that allowed women and children to survive the cold in simple leather dwellings. Hunters spent a lot of time gathering branches even when they were very tired. Subarctic Indians often added a layer of dry grass under the pine branches for even more softness and warmth. They knew that the higher a person was above the ground, the higher their chances of waking up alive. In severe frosts, the bedding could reach 30 centimeters in thickness. This created the effect of a modern bed with orthopedic and thermal properties. Each warrior had his own set of skins, which he never left out in the open. Before going to bed, the skins were shaken out to get rid of excess moisture and frost. Moisture inside the fur was the main enemy, as it quickly turned to ice. A dry bed was the key to a long and safe sleep on a freezing night. During the day, bedding was rolled up and stored in the back of the teepee. This was done to free up space and protect the fur from sparks from the fire. If a skin got wet, it was immediately dried on special wooden frames. The smell of smoke from the fire was considered normal if it meant that the sleeping area was dry. Some tribes prohibited the use of certain animal skins for sleeping. For example, bear fur was considered too sacred or dangerous for constant contact at night. Preference was always given to bison and deer because of their unique thermal properties. These animals spend the winter in the snow, and their fur is perfectly adapted to the cold. Hunters on solo expeditions built temporary beds even for short rests. They never sat on fallen trees without first clearing them of snow. Cold contact with the tree could cause rapid numbness in the back muscles. Knowledge of heat physics was passed on to children from an early age through fairy tales. We would be interested to hear your opinion on such methods of organizing daily life. What do you think about how Native Americans used only natural materials to survive? Write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on unique facts about the lives of great tribes. I will reveal the most important secret of survival, which experts today call the rule of moisture removal. For the warriors of the Cheyenne and Crow tribes, sweat in winter was not a sign of fatigue, but a harbinger of imminent death. They knew very well that a sweaty person in the cold was doomed. Therefore, Native Americans never allowed themselves to sweat profusely while walking, hunting, or carrying loads. Moisture soaking into fur clothing instantly deprived it of all its protective properties and turned warm fur into a cold trap. If a hunter felt hot, he immediately slowed down and loosened his belt and collar. This allowed excess heat to escape before active sweating began. Such control over the body was considered a sign of an experienced warrior. Changing even slightly damp clothes in the evening was a mandatory ritual for every member of the tribe without exception. The Indians knew that even a little moisture could lead to frostbite on the chest or back at night, when the body is immobile and especially vulnerable. Wearing wet deerskin shoes was considered a serious crime against one's own health and the future of the tribe. Special wooden sticks driven into the ground at the edge of the hearth were used to dry moccasins. The shoes were carefully stretched, allowing the heat to slowly draw out the moisture. The leather was never brought too close to an open flame, because over-dried leather became brittle and could tear during a deep snow crossing, dooming a person to disaster. Every Native American knew from childhood that dry clothes were the only reliable barrier against wind and cold. Preparing spare sets of shoes and clothes took up most of the women's time in the winter camp. It was their way of protecting their families and tribes. Winter required people to be slow, restrained, and careful in every physical action. Quick movements led to overheating, and overheating was extremely dangerous in the cold and was considered a hidden enemy. The inner layers of clothing were often made of soft suede with a short, dense pile. This material absorbed a minimal amount of moisture and allowed the skin to breathe without creating a greenhouse effect. Outer clothing made of thick bison hide was worn only in very low temperatures or strong winds. In warmer weather, Native Americans preferred light capes made of deerskins, which regulated heat exchange more easily and did not overheat the body. Special attention was always paid to protecting the neck and head, through which most of the heat is lost. Fur hoods were never pulled too tightly to allow air to circulate and moisture to escape. The Indians noticed that frost on the collar was frozen breath, which needed to be wiped off regularly. It was strictly forbidden to breathe inside clothing, because this quickly moistened the fur from the inside and deprived it of its protective properties. Mittens were always made double, with a layer of dry moss, wool, or animal down. This design retained heat and absorbed excess moisture at the same time. They were always tied to long straps or cords so as not to lose them in deep snow or during sudden movements. Losing a mitten could cost a warrior his fingers in just a few minutes, so checking equipment before going out was considered a sacred rule. Children wore clothes that were slightly larger than their actual size. This created an additional air cushion that retained body heat and allowed them to grow without constantly changing their wardrobe. Clothes should never restrict movement so as not to interfere with normal blood circulation. The Indians knew well that it was the disruption of blood flow to the extremities that was the main cause of winter injuries and frostbite. The women of the tribe used special bone scrapers to thoroughly clean the flesh from the skins. This laborious process made the clothing soft, elastic, and flexible even in the most severe frost. Rough leather rubbed against the body, creating micro cracks and wounds that healed very poorly in winter and could lead to infection. The comfort of clothing was not a luxury, but a matter of survival, directly affecting the effectiveness of a hunter and warrior. Want to know the answer to the main question of this issue? In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans controlled the invisible air currents inside their dwellings. We will examine the correct placement of the entrance, hearth, and smoke hole. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the teepee was transformed into the perfect winter shelter from the inside? You've definitely never heard about this unique secret in regular historical films. We're talking about the inner lining of the teepee, called an ozon or liner. It was an additional wall made of skins that was attached to the poles from the inside. This element was never ignored, as it performed a vital engineering function. The ozon created a powerful draft, directing cold air from the ground upward. This flow rushed toward the smoke hole, completely bypassing the people in their sleeping quarters. This allowed the interior of the dwelling to remain surprisingly warm, even during a fierce blizzard. Without this lining, the warm air from the fire would simply escape instantly. Any disruption to the structure of this inner wall would result in heavy smoke filling the room. The Indians believed that proper airflow was the soul of the house, which must be protected. On winter nights, the edge of the lining was pressed tightly to the ground with heavy stones or snow. This completely eliminated drafts at floor level, where people slept. This system allowed very little wood to be used for effective heating. Thanks to this invention, it was possible to stay inside the teepee without heavy fur cloaks. The efficiency of the ozon amazed the first researchers, who were freezing in their wooden houses. It was a perfect combination of knowledge of physics and natural materials. The inner lining also prevented condensation from forming on the main walls of the teepee. Moisture ran down the outside of the liner directly into the ground without getting on the beds. This kept the dwelling dry throughout the long, snowy winter. Dryness inside was essential for the health of all members of the large family. Sacred drawings were often applied to the ozon, telling the story of the clan. These images provided not only aesthetic but also spiritual protection for those sleeping. The Indians believed that beautiful walls pleased the spirits and attracted good luck to the house. Every morning, the lining was inspected for damage or holes. If a crack appeared in the ozon, it was immediately repaired with tendons and bone needles. Even a small hole could disrupt air circulation and create a cold zone. The elders strictly monitored the young people to ensure that they installed this element correctly. A mistake in installing the ozon was considered a sign of laziness and disrespect for traditions. In summer, this lining was often removed for better ventilation of the dwelling. However, in winter, it was as important as the leather covering itself. It served as an additional layer of insulation, retaining heat inside the leather cone. The heat from the fire accumulated in the space between the two layers of leather. The thinnest and lightest skins of young deer were chosen to make the ozon. They had to be strong but not too heavy for the poles. The teepee makers were valued like gold in the tribe. Their work ensured the survival of the entire people in the harshest years. Like this, if you are impressed by this ingenious heating system used by the ancient inhabitants of the prairies. Your ratings help us create more interesting episodes about ancient technologies. It's the easiest way to support our research into history. What you are about to learn will completely change your perception of winter travel. The subarctic Indians had a rule never to continue their journey in a heavy snowstorm. If visibility dropped, the hunter was obliged to immediately start building a snow shelter. Attempting to walk blindly almost always resulted in disorientation and rapid death. They knew that snow is an excellent insulator and can save lives. People would dig a deep hole in a large snowdrift or build a dome out of blocks. Inside such a snow chamber, the temperature would quickly rise to a safe level. The warmth of human breath was enough to heat this small space. A mandatory condition was the presence of a ventilation hole in the upper part of the dome. It was pierced with a spear or a long stick to ensure the flow of fresh air. Without this channel, a person could suffocate from carbon dioxide while sleeping. All valuable equipment was also brought inside so that it would not be buried by a blizzard. It was customary to sit in a snow pit only on a bedding of leather or pine branches. Direct contact with snow caused clothing to get wet, which was tantamount to death. These rules of survival were considered sacred commandments, passed down from father to son. The hunter had to remain completely calm in this icy trap. Snow shelters were often built in pairs so that people could keep each other warm. Collective warmth allowed for a higher temperature to be maintained inside the snow dome. The entrance to the burrow was always closed with a piece of leather or tightly packed with snow. This protected against the icy wind that raged on the surface. The Indians knew how to determine the quality of snow suitable for building such dwellings. Snow that was too loose did not hold its shape and could collapse on a sleeping person. They looked for dense drifts formed by the wind in open spaces. The ability to find the right snowdrift was a matter of life and death. Before going to bed, the hunter had to clean the frost off his clothes. Any drops of water on the skin could cause frostbite during the night's rest. They used bone knives to scrape the ice off their fur jackets. Cleanliness and dryness were more important than comfort in extreme situations. Inside such a shelter, it was forbidden to light an open fire due to the risk of collapse. Too high a temperature could melt the ceiling, which would then turn to ice. The Indians used only small oil lamps for lighting and minimal heat. The light from the lamp helped to monitor the condition of the shelter walls. If the blizzard lasted for several days, people remained inside until it completely subsided. They conserved their strength and food by falling into a state similar to light hibernation. The ability to wait was as important a skill as the ability to run fast. Winter did not like haste and punished those who rushed. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans coped with this terrible weather with the help of food. You will learn the secret of a product that replaced an entire pharmacy and kitchen for them. Will this secret be useful to the modern traveler? Building a fire in winter required each warrior to have special, almost sacred knowledge about trees and their properties. The Indians of the Great Woods knew very well that dry birch gives off even, strong heat and hardly smokes even in severe frost. They knew how to distinguish truly dry wood by the sound of the strike and the color of the bark. They never used wet branches, which created a thick white column of smoke. Such smoke not only revealed the camp to potential enemies, but also made the air inside the cramped teepee heavy and dangerous to breathe. In winter, the fire in the center of the dwelling was kept burning throughout the night without interruption. However, the size of the flame was always strictly controlled by the older members of the family who had the experience of many winters. Huge bonfires were considered a sign of inexperience and a waste of valuable forest fuel. A large flame quickly consumed the wood and created excessive heat. A small, neat, and efficient hearth provided enough heat for heating, cooking, and sustaining life until morning. To preserve the coals until dawn, they were often covered with a thin layer of wood ash. This simple technique allowed the heat to be retained inside the hearth throughout the night. In the morning, a light breath or a splinter was enough to revive the flames. This skill was critically important when people's fingers were numb from the morning cold, and any delay threatened frostbite. The women of the tribe were considered the main keepers of the fire, its rhythm, and its hidden properties, passing this knowledge on to their daughters. There was a strict ban on building fires under trees with large snow caps on their branches. The heat from the flames caused heavy snow to collapse directly onto people's heads. This could not only instantly extinguish the fire, but also seriously injure a sleeping hunter or child. Sometimes such a collapse led to tragic consequences. Therefore, safety always came first when choosing a place to camp and set up a teepee. The Indians knew how to light a fire even in the strongest storm with the help of carefully prepared tinder. They kept dry moss, tinder fungus, and thin bark in special leather pouches under their clothes. The warmth of the human body ensured that the tinder always remained dry and ready for use. A mistake in lighting a fire in the cold could be fatal, especially far from camp and help. The smoke from the fire was also used to further smoke the skins used to cover the teepee. This made the skin denser, waterproof, and protected it from rotting in wet weather. The smoky smell gradually permeated clothing and dwellings, creating an additional barrier against insects and parasites. Each type of wood gave off its own special aroma, different smoke density, and its own quality of heat. Flat stones, specially selected for their size and shape, were always placed around the hearth. They accumulated heat from the flames throughout the evening. At night, these stones continued to slowly give off heat when the wood had already burned down to embers. Some Indians took these heated stones to bed with them, wrapped in a piece of leather or fur. It was a simple, reliable, and effective way to warm the body locally. It was forbidden to throw trash, bones, or food scraps into the winter fire, out of deep respect for the spirit of fire. The Indians believed that fire was a living being with character and memory. It required care, cleanliness, and proper treatment. The cleanliness of the hearth was considered a guarantee that the flame would give off good, even heat, and cause no harm. The elders closely monitored the behavior of young people around the fire and severely punished them for disrespect. Firewood for long winter nights was prepared in advance before dark. Hunters looked for standing dry trees that had not had time to absorb moisture from deep snowdrifts. Such trees were easy to split and burned well. Hardwoods were especially valued for their long burning time and lack of dangerous sparks. Sparks could burn a hole in the valuable leather covering of the dwelling and lead to disaster. Fire also served as a means of communication between distant groups of hunters and camps. Smoke signals in winter were particularly visible against the backdrop of clear blue skies and white snow. However, night fires were hidden in lowlands, ravines, or thick thickets. Secrecy was essential for survival in the face of intertribal conflicts and the constant threat of sudden attack. What if I told you that the real secret to Native American survival in the harsh winter was not weapons or strength, but a special kind of fat? During the cold months, tribes adhered to a strict and well-planned diet, completely eliminating random snacks and haphazard eating. They could only eat at certain times and only the right foods. Their main food was pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, rendered fat, and sour berries. This rule was unbreakable. Before going to bed, everyone, from children to elders, had to eat a portion of fatty food, otherwise the night could be dangerous. Fat served as the main fuel for the human body's internal heating mechanism. It provided slow and stable energy that maintained warmth for many hours. Without sufficient calories, the body would stop generating heat after just a few hours of sleep, and a person would risk not waking up. The Indians understood perfectly well that in winter, food was not just a source of satiety, but a real medicine. They poetically called fat-locked sun, which continues to warm a person from within even in complete darkness and severe frost. Under no circumstances was it ever permitted to use cold snow to quench thirst without first melting it. Eating snow instantly lowered the temperature of the internal organs and could cause dangerous temperature shock. This rule was the first one taught to children as soon as they began to understand the speech of their elders. Water was always heated over a fire, often with the addition of pine needles, roots, or tree bark to enhance the warming effect and enrich the drink with beneficial substances. Drinking warm infusions before bed helped maintain active blood circulation in the hands and feet. This reduced the risk of nighttime frostbite and cramps. In winter, there was almost always a pot of water standing by, ready for immediate use at any time of the night. Such strict discipline in eating and drinking was the key to staying healthy throughout the long winter. People who neglected fatty foods or warm drinks were the first to fall victim to disease, exhaustion, and cold. Pemmican could be stored for years without losing its unique nutritional and taste properties. It was carefully packed in airtight leather bags that did not allow moisture or air to pass through. It was an ideal strategic reserve in case hunting was unsuccessful for weeks or even months. Every family tried to stock up on as much pemmican as possible before the frost set in, knowing that it would be their lifeline in the hardest days. The berries in pemmican provided the vitamins needed to combat winter scurvy and loss of strength. The Indians knew the properties of every herb, every root, and every fruit that grew on their land. They never ate only meat, fully aware of the importance of a varied natural diet. The health of teeth and gums was considered an important indicator of a warrior's overall condition and his readiness for long journeys and hunting. During heavy snowstorms, when it was impossible to leave the teepee, pemmican was the only food available. It did not need to be cooked, which saved precious firewood and energy in extreme conditions. Children and the elderly received the best pieces, as their bodies were more vulnerable to the cold. Fair and thoughtful distribution of food ensured peace, trust, and order within the community, even in the most difficult times. The bones of hunted animals were also never thrown away, but carefully boiled to extract the marrow. Marrow was considered a special delicacy that gave incredible strength, endurance, and quick recovery. The Indians used nature's resources to the fullest, showing deep respect for every animal they killed. Thriftiness and the absence of waste were not virtues, but a necessary condition for survival in a world of limited resources. Honey and maple syrup were used in some regions as quick sources of energy. These sweet foods provided an instant burst of energy needed for sudden bursts of speed in deep snow or emergency rescues. However, the basis of the diet remained animal proteins and thick fats, which provided long-lasting and stable energy. The balance of substances in the body was maintained at an intuitive but surprisingly accurate level, honed by centuries of experience. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans coped with the cold, not only through nutrition, but also through special equipment. We will talk about the things and technologies that allowed them to move through the snow faster and quieter than wolves. Are you ready to see ancient knowledge in action and understand how far ahead of their time it was? Moving through deep snowdrifts required people to use special tools and skills. Native Americans never left camp without snowshoes if the snow was above ankle level. The design of these devices strictly corresponded to the characteristics of the landscape and the type of forest. Snowshoes allowed hunters to literally float above the surface without wasting energy on sinking. Violating this rule led to rapid physical exhaustion and cardiac arrest. A person stuck in deep snow without support became easy prey for any predator. Snowshoes were made of sturdy ash wood and bound with thin straps of rawhide. Their condition was monitored as carefully as that of combat weapons. The hunting party had a rule of constantly changing the leader who walked in front of everyone. The first person paved the way, expending a huge amount of physical energy. The rest followed closely behind, conserving their strength for a possible fight or a long chase. This strategy allowed the group to cover enormous distances in a single day. Winter journeys were always planned so that they could find reliable shelter before sunset. Twilight in the northern prairies comes suddenly and brings with it a sharp drop in temperature. Attempting to set up camp in the dark in severe frost often resulted in serious injuries. The speed of the group was always determined by the capabilities of its weakest or oldest member. To transport heavy loads, the Indians used special sleds called travois. These were two long poles attached to a horse or dog on which the load was placed. Travois glided perfectly over snow and grass without getting stuck in uneven ground. With their help, tribes could transport their dwellings and food supplies to new locations. Hunters were able to read signs in the snow with remarkable accuracy and speed. They knew what the tracks of a well-fed animal looked like and what the tracks of a wounded or hungry animal looked like. Winter turned the earth into an open book, which the Indians studied throughout their conscious lives. Knowledge of animal habits helped them avoid dangerous encounters with bears or wolf packs. Footwear for traveling was extremely soft and had no hard soles. This allowed the foot to feel the surface better and maintain natural warmth through movement. Inside the moccasins, there was always a layer of dry fur or grass for additional insulation. If the shoes got wet, they were immediately replaced with a spare pair that had been kept warm. Running long distances in frosty air was prohibited unless absolutely necessary. Deep and frequent breathing of cold air could cause lung damage and severe coughing. The Indians moved at an even, measured pace that allowed them to breathe only through their noses. This warmed the air before it entered the sensitive bronchi. During stops, hunters never sat directly on the snow or ice. They used their snowshoes as temporary benches or laid down armfuls of branches. It was important to keep the pelvic area and lower back warm for normal kidney function. The slightest hypothermia in these areas could put a warrior out of action for weeks. Discipline on the march was maintained by the authority of experienced trackers and leaders. Young warriors unquestioningly obeyed commands concerning safety and pace. Winter was a time when the mistakes of one could lead to the death of the entire group. Collective responsibility was the main law of life in the open spaces. Winter brought with it a special atmosphere of silence, which the Indians tried not to disturb. In winter camps, there was a strict ban on loud shouting and noise without good reason. They knew that in the frosty, dense air, sounds could travel for many kilometers. Silence was the best way to hide the location of the village from hostile tribes and scouts. Particular attention was paid to silence inside the teepee during the night and evening hours. It was believed that excessive noise could scare away good luck and attract the evil spirits of the winter cold. In fact, it helped people to rest properly and maintain clarity of mind in isolation. Mutual respect for the peace of fellow tribesmen was the basis for peaceful coexistence in cramped conditions. Traces around the camp were kept to narrow paths that were well known to everyone. The Indians never left trash or food scraps near the entrance to their dwellings. This was done so as not to attract hungry predators right to the door of the house. Keeping the area clean in winter was a matter of safety for children and pets. Every suspicious sound in the forest was immediately analyzed by experienced warriors and hunters. The crack of a branch or an unusual bird call could mean the approach of strangers or large animals. Winter taught people to be extremely attentive observers and to listen to the voice of the earth itself. The ability to be silent and listen was valued more highly than the ability to speak beautifully and at length. Inside the teepee, communication often took place in whispers or with the help of special gestures. This created an atmosphere of comfort and protection from the hostile outside world of cold. From an early age, children were taught to be restrained in expressing their emotions during the winter. Calmness helped to conserve internal energy and maintain stable breathing. Winter evenings were a time for telling sacred legends and stories about ancestors. The storyteller's voice flowed quietly, forcing listeners to concentrate their attention to the utmost. These stories were not only entertaining, but also carried important lessons about survival and morality. This is how the knowledge accumulated by hundreds of generations over thousands of years of life on the plains was passed on. The Indians avoided unnecessary conflicts and quarrels throughout the winter season. They understood that anger and stress weakened the body's defenses against the cold. Peace in the family was a guarantee that every member of the community would be ready to come to the rescue. Psychological stability was as important as having warm fur blankets. There were special pipe-smoking rituals that were conducted in complete silence. Tobacco smoke was considered a means of communicating with higher powers and cleansing the mind of vanity. These moments helped the leaders make informed decisions about the fate of the tribe in difficult times. Silence was a space for reflection and strategic planning for the future. When a guest arrived at the camp, He was greeted with respect, but without unnecessary fuss and commotion. The guest was given time to warm up and eat before being asked about the news. The ability to observe etiquette in extreme conditions was a sign of high culture and nobility. Winter tested people not only for physical strength, but also for spiritual strength. The silence of the winter forest was perceived as the sacred presence of the great creator. The Indians believed that nature was resting and gathering strength before its spring awakening. Man had to fit into this rhythm without disturbing the harmony of the surrounding world. This deep understanding of nature made them the true masters of their harsh lands. Frostbite was the most common and dangerous threat to life, and the Indians developed a sophisticated system to combat it. They knew well that cold kills slowly and imperceptibly, so they treated it with the utmost respect. It was never permissible to ignore even a slight tingling or numbness in the fingers. Such sensations were considered the body's first warning of danger. At the first signs of skin whitening, the Indians used the warmth of their own breath or body. They applied their frozen hands to their stomachs or armpits, where the body temperature is highest and the heat is transferred gently and safely. There was a strict prohibition on rubbing the affected areas of the body with snow or rough fabric. The elders explained that tiny ice crystals form in frozen skin. These tiny ice crystals could cause microscopic wounds and severely worsen the condition of damaged tissue. Instead, natural animal fats were used, which were rubbed in with very slow and gentle movements. The fat created a protective film that retained the remaining internal heat in the skin and helped the tissue to recover. The face was often covered with a thick layer of fat mixed with wood soot or red ochre. This layer served several purposes and had been tested by generations of hunters. Not only did it protect the skin from the icy wind, but it also prevented severe sunburn. The sun's reflection off clean snow could cause temporary blindness and severe eye damage. Dark circles of soot around the eyes worked like modern sunglasses, helping to preserve vision during long journeys. Special attention was always paid to mittens, which were never removed outdoors. Even briefly exposing one's hands in severe frost was considered a serious mistake. Losing hand protection at temperatures below 30 degrees would mean rapid loss of sensitivity and the risk of disability for a warrior. Mittens were often made from beaver skin, which has unique water-repellent properties. Inside such mittens, it was always dry and warm thanks to the right choice of fur and dense construction. The feet were protected by multi-layered moccasins stuffed with dry wool or specially prepared grass. The Indians knew very well that if their feet froze, the rest of their bodies would soon freeze too. While walking, they periodically moved their toes to stimulate blood flow. This helped to keep warm even during long walks in the snow. If a hunter felt his feet beginning to go numb, he would immediately stop to rub and warm them, not considering it a waste of time. Children's cheeks and noses were smeared with thick bear fat before they went outside. Children's skin was considered particularly vulnerable to cold and wind. This fat created a reliable barrier against chapping, cracking, and painful damage. Skincare was part of daily hygiene in winter camps, just like eating. Native Americans valued their bodies as the main tool given to them by nature for life and survival. Ears were protected with special fur pads built into winter headgear. Frostbite of the ears often occurred if a warrior forgot to adjust his hood while running or hunting. Loss of sensitivity could occur very quickly and imperceptibly. Elders carefully examined young people after they returned from hunting for damage and white patches on the skin. Early detection of the problem made it possible to avoid serious and irreversible health consequences. The Indians also used the bark of certain trees to make healing ointments for burns and frostbite. These remedies had natural antiseptic properties and reduced inflammation. Such ointments helped the skin recover more quickly after exposure to extreme temperatures. Knowledge of forest medicines was passed down from generation to generation by women as an essential part of the tribe's survival. Nature provided not only cold, but also everything necessary to combat its effects. If frostbite did occur, the victim was placed in the warmest place in the teepee. They were covered with skins and not left alone for a minute. The person was given hot decoctions to drink to warm the body from the inside and restore strength. It was important not to let them fall asleep until sensitivity returned to their limbs. It was a long and intense struggle to save every finger and toe. Discipline in matters of self-preservation was the key to longevity for Indian warriors. They did not consider caution a sign of weakness or cowardice. On the contrary, they called it the wisdom of a mature person who respects the forces of nature. Winter was a strict teacher who punished carelessness and rewarded knowledge of the smallest details. Every surviving elder was a living textbook on medicine, anatomy, and the art of survival. Survival in winter was an exclusively collective endeavor for all tribes. Individualism at this time of year was considered extremely dangerous and was condemned by all elders. There was an unbreakable rule: never leave a fellow tribesman alone if he showed signs of weakness. Hypothermia often causes apathy, and a person may simply stop fighting for their life. During severe frosts, several families often joined together to live in one large dwelling. More people inside the teepee meant more natural heat from their bodies. It also allowed for round-the-clock shifts around the fire so that the flames would not go out for a minute. Living together strengthened social ties and helped distribute the heavy work. The elders and small children always occupied the most protected and warmest places in the center of the house. Caring for the most vulnerable members of society was not a moral duty, but a survival strategy. The knowledge and experience of the elderly were valued more than the physical strength of young and passionate warriors. The advice of wise people helped to avoid dangers that were not always obvious to young people. The exchange of food and resources between different families was a mandatory law for all tribes. If one family had a successful hunt, they shared their spoils with those who had nothing. Winter forced people to forget old grudges and quarrels for the common goal of survival. Social cohesion was as effective a tool as warm fur blankets. Gathering firewood was the responsibility of young men who went out into the forest in large groups. They helped widows and the elderly by bringing fuel to their doors without being asked. It was a form of service to their people that earned a warrior respect and honor. Mutual aid permeated all aspects of winter camp life from sunset to sunrise. During long snowstorms, people entertained each other with games of dice or telling jokes. Maintaining a good mood was important for preserving mental health in a confined space. Laughter helped to cope with the fear of the unknown and the harshness of the surrounding nature. Optimism was an important factor for survival in the conditions of a long polar or forest winter. Women worked together sewing and repairing clothes, sharing their secrets of craftsmanship. Working together made monotonous work easier and faster for each of them. They made sure that every warrior had good moccasins and warm fur capes. The rear was as important as the front of the hunting grounds in the winter prairie. If the tribe decided to move to a new location, everyone acted as a single, well-coordinated mechanism. Packing was done quickly and without unnecessary fuss to minimize the time spent in the open wind. Each item had its own designated place in the luggage for ease of transport. Order in their affairs reflected order in their thoughts and discipline of spirit. Religion and rituals also served as a means of uniting people around common values. Joint prayers to the Great Spirit gave people hope for the early arrival of spring and warmth. Faith in a higher justice helped them endure the hardships and difficulties of the winter months. Spiritual unity was the foundation on which physical survival was built. Winter ended with a great celebration when the whole tribe gathered together to celebrate their victory over the cold. It was a time of joy, dancing, and gratitude that everyone had survived. Every life saved was celebrated as a great achievement for the entire community. The wisdom of the ancestors once again proved its effectiveness in the face of harsh reality. Looking at these strict rules, we understand that the survival of the Native Americans was the result of a deep analysis of nature. This knowledge was passed down for thousands of years and allowed people to master the harshest regions of the planet. Today, we can only admire their resilience and how they used every opportunity to preserve life. The history of indigenous peoples is a great lesson in adaptation and the will to overcome the elements. Which of these rules do you think was the most difficult to follow in real life? Would you like to see a video about how Native Americans built their legendary canoes or fished under the ice? Write your suggestions for future videos in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. We will continue to tell you about the most amazing secrets of ancient civilizations and tribes.